Did you know there's a silent cancer in your organization that's voraciously eating up all your profits like Pac-Man? Waka, 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 waka. What if I told you you can invest a small amount of money and a little bit of your time and eradicate that cancer, get your profits back rolling in the right direction, get a huge ROI on that investment, and begin to finally start to generate the profits you always dreamed of when you started your business? Now, I know the stress you're going through because I have run so many different businesses. You're going through your P&L, you're crunching the numbers, you're really just struggling to figure out, why am I not making money? I've spent decades owning and running and managing restaurants and construction and commercial cleaning businesses and even hotels. And these are high turnover, low margin businesses. There is literally no margin for error, because the margins are so very small. And so if you can't keep your turnover down in these businesses, you will quickly go from profitable to out of business in the blink of an eye. I have lived that stress, and I have come out on the other side. Many lessons learned the hard way, through trial and error, through hard knocks. But now I have strategies that will help you conquer and cut out the turnover cancer and begin to change the future of your business. So I want to talk about this. Many of us run our budget forecasts almost like we're in Candyland or Fantasyland. So we make the assumption in our modeling and our budget forecasting from the starting point that we will consistently have a full team of people in place to deliver the good or service that's at the core of our business, right? That's kind of just a baseline assumption, right? We're going to be able to do what we need to do. We're going to run projections that if we have this many employees at this wage and they can produce this many units of output, we're going to make this much profit, right? But those projections, we either ignore or we underestimate the devastating power and cost of turnover. So today I want to share 3 examples of how turnover will gut your profits. Now, just for ease sake today, I'm going to give you a simple example. I'm going to say you're either a cleaning company or a construction company or a small independent restaurant, maybe a franchise restaurant, and you have around 50 employees and $1 million in top line revenue, okay? So that's kind of your general setup. And your targets are 60% variable cost, 25% fixed costs, and then a 15% margin. That's what you're targeting. And in these businesses I'm talking about, 15% is doing really well. Some of those are down at 3 to 5%, others are around 10%. So we're going to be optimistic, and you're going to be optimistic in this example, thinking you're going to get a 15% margin. So again, no turnover or open positions, you would make $150,000 in profit in addition to whatever you're paying yourself in salary for the work you're doing for the business or for the company, okay? So that's a pretty good scenario, right? Let's say you pay your salary to yourself of $100,000, and then because you're the business, so you're an owner operator, and then you generate $150,000 in profits as the business owner. Your bottom line, when it all trickles down and comes through the wash, you're making $250,000. That sounds pretty good, right? I think most of us would agree that's a solid income. But for many of you, you're not hitting that. And the reason is because in the real world, outside of our modeling and our projections, turnover does exist. And if you can't get that cancer eradicated in your business, or at least isolated and kind of kept at bay, it's going to do one of 3 bad things. And you have essentially 3 bad choices if that cancer is running through your organization. So I want to talk about each of these options and why each of them is bad in its own way. So the first option is you have constant turnover, let's say really high turnover, like 400%, which means you're turning over every position every 3 months. And I've seen a lot of businesses. In fact, some of my early cleaning businesses, we were turning over those positions every 2 and 3 months. So I'm not throwing shade on anybody. I'm just saying it is not out of the realm of possibility that you have that level of turnover. I see it. I'm working in a hotel doing some stuff, and they turn over the dishwashers every couple months. So, you might be having a 600% turnover if you're turning over every 6 months or every 2 months. So in that scenario, there are some organizations that just continue to pay whatever it takes to refill and fill and fill again the positions that keep turning over. So they're in this constant just churn of somebody leaves and then boom, we're going to hire again and go through that whole process. And we'll talk about that. Second one is to keep production rolling along at the optimal level without new hires by basically leaning harder on your existing people. So the people that are showing up, pay them overtime. The managers that are in charge of that particular piece of your business, they're going to be pulled in to do some production or frontline delivery type of stuff. So that's the second option. Third option is hold the line on hiring budgets and overtime, but cut production. So if 60% of your people are showing up, you just put 60% output. Now, in the real world, you often mix and match. So, you may use option 2 in the immediate where you're going to pay people overtime and they're going to do their thing. And then you're still working on hiring, but then maybe you cut production a little bit. So it's a little bit of mix and match. These are not isolated kind of binary decisions. Those are kind of your 3 options. So let's explore each of these. Scenario 1, you are committed to fill those open positions no matter how often they pop open. Your recruiting budget is going to be astronomical if you have high turnover. And I almost guarantee you, in your budgeting and forecasting, you're not putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into employee recruitment. Now, I could be wrong, but I have worked with a lot of companies. I've yet to see any that allocate the full cost of this high turnover. So, but think about why it's so costly, because some of us just kind of gloss over that turnover isn't that costly, right? First off, you're going to pay someone to write the help wanted ads, right? If you have an HR person or maybe an administrative person, you're going to have them working on that. So it's a piece of their time first, right? Then whatever platforms you're going to put those ads on, whether it's Indeed or, Monster or any of the other ones, and there's several of them, you're going to be paying to get those ads out there, right? So there's an additional cost. Then you're going to be paying most likely someone to do the interviews. Then if you find someone you like, you're going to have to drug test them most likely. You're going to have to run some reference checks. So again, these are most likely outsourced things. You're probably not having them pee in a cup in your administrative offices, right? So you're outsourcing that to a third party. You're having a third party run the background checks. You're checking the references, all that. So a lot of cost involved with that. And if any of these fail, like they fail the drug test and that's against your policy, you're back to square one, right? So you've invested all this time and money and then you've gotten nowhere. So that's kind of the first hurdle you got to get over. And some of you are going to say, well, I'm turning this over to AI. But even AI, you've got to manage it. You've got to have somebody who's kind of working on putting that all together. So there's really no way to avoid this type of cost. So let's say you get through all that, you place the ad, you hire somebody, you get through it, and you make that offer, right? Do you know what happens a lot of times? The candidate ghosts you. Or here's another one that's a real kicker. They politely let you know, oh yeah, I took another job yesterday or a week ago because you were a little bit slow in your process. Or, yeah, I heard your offer, but I actually have been interviewing with a bunch of companies and this company's paying 50 cents more. So sorry about that, but I'm good. And again, you've done all this work, right? You've invested in the background check and the drug test, all the things that go into this, the ads, and you've gotten nowhere. You're back to square one. So that's another possibility. But even when the stars align, right? They pass all the screens, they accept the job, they actually show up on the first day, you're still not out of the woods. If you think you've hit the golden ticket, you're wrong. Because you still have the cost of training them, and you still have this idea that you hope they're not going to be misaligned with the work, that the work, they're going to think, oh, that sounded fun, but boy, it really isn't that fun. I don't really like this. And so I've had this where you go through this whole process and they show up for a day and then they never come back, or they show up for a week and they never come back, or they show up for a month and they never come back. That has happened to me so many times. It is just so deflating, not only to you, but also to your entire team, to the person who trains them, to the person who hired them, all that investment in that. And you're back to square one with another open position. So it's a really difficult thing. Now, let's say you hit the home run on everything and they actually stick. They go beyond the week and the month and the quarter or what have you. Even with that, and this is your perfect scenario, their productivity is not at 100%. You don't just hire someone into a position and on day one, they're cranking it out at 100% capacity, right? They're not. And depending on the job, it may take a week, or it may take 3 weeks, or it may take a month, or sometimes a full quarter to get them up to speed. So when you think about that top line output, right? You've done these projections of you're going to be $1 million business this year. That's assuming you're at 100% output, but they're not going to give you 100% output. So you're going to be subsidizing that along the way. You may still be paying somebody a couple hours overtime while they're learning, or you may be paying somebody to train them. So all of that goes into why this is very costly, very, very costly. The Society for Human Resource Management estimates for every new hire, you're going to spend $4,700, almost $5,000. Now, you may say we don't spend that much because these aren't, and that's an average. And some of that goes into executive pay. But I looked up specifically to industries. Restaurant workers cost their companies just through the hiring and recruitment process around $2,000, while cleaning, construction, and hospitality, those run around $3,500. And in these industries, the average turnover is somewhere between 100%, meaning you're changing people every year, those positions are churning, up to 400%, meaning you're changing them every 3 months. So just a quick bit of math on that 100 to 400%. With only 50 employees, if you have average turnover levels, turnover is going to cost your bottom line somewhere between $100,000 and $700,000. That is a lot of money. Think about that. Remember, in this initial scenario, you were going to come out with $150,000 in profit, right? So if you hit the $100,000, you've now squeezed your profit from 150 all the way down to 50,000. That really stinks. Now, I want to tell you a super pumped hidden thing to think about that so many employers miss. Most of us outsource our payroll. Very few companies do their payroll in-house. So you have a third party, they take care of it. Paychecks, or there's a whole lot of companies. And the employers tend to forget that they are paying SUTA and FUTA payroll taxes on every employee. And so those numbers are capped at $9,000 and $7,000 per year. Those are state unemployment and federal unemployment. So what's cool is if you keep somebody in a position all year, you only pay that tax on the first $7,000 or the first $9,000 of wages. But do you know what happens if you turn that position over twice in a year? If you're at a 200% turnover, you're going to pay that tax twice. If you're at a 400% turnover, you're going to pay that tax 4 times. If you're at 600%, 6 times. So you are just throwing money away. And that's at each employee. Remember, you got 50 employees. So all of a sudden, just on SUTA and FUTA, if you're at that 100% to 400%, you're going to cost your company an additional $10,000 to $40,000. That's not chump change. If your total profit projection is 150 and you're wasting 40,000 just on SUTA and FUTA, that's a real hit to your bottom line. And if you're in the construction industry, your base rate for unemployment is way higher. So that's a low number. It could be triple, quadruple that. It's pretty staggering how much money can be lost. So returning to this scenario 1, 60% variable cost, 25% fixed cost, 15% margin. If you have that 110,000 up to 790,000 or 740,000 in turnover costs, you're either going to be very minorly profitable or you're not going to be profitable at all. So that's a scenario, but that may be how you want to roll. So let's move on to option 2 for business owners. And I've seen this a lot. This is bring in the cavalry. I can never say that word. Cavalry, the white horse guys. Bring them in from within or turn to a temp service. So let's say turnover is gutting about 40% of your workforce is just constantly churning. And that's a pretty standard number in, restaurants and in cleaning and construction, a lot of these things, hotels. So 40% churn, the other 60% of your people are pretty stable. So your game plan is just, that's all right. If they churn, I'm just going to pay the people who show up. I'm going to pay them overtime. They're going to be happy. I'm going to keep it up flowing at 100% output, right? And so you do that. Or maybe you augment your existing staff with temp workers. And if you've ever used like Upshift, you're paying a 40% premium. So if you want to set the wage at $15 an hour, you got to pay a 40% upcharge to the company. So you're paying $21 an hour. Now, what this will do is it'll keep your top line revenue meeting projections. You'll continue to roll along, but you are going to eat up your profit margin. When I first started my commercial cleaning business, turnover was killing us. But here's the thing. I didn't have the option to just clean 60% of the building, right? If 3 of 5 people who showed up to clean a little 3-story office tower showed up, right? Guess what I had to do? I had to say, sorry, guys, you guys got to stay and work overtime because we've got to get the building clean. We can't just skip 40% of the building. And so I was paying them overtime. And then, of course, I was also pulling in the manager to be like, hey, can you help them finish up this building? So the manager was there for a couple hours a night, even though I'm paying the manager at a much higher rate than a cleaner would be paid. And so all of a sudden it killed my bottom line. So in this second scenario, I kept production rolling, right? I still continue to get those checks from the customers, but I absorbed a 25% bump in variable costs to cover the overtime and the manager. So if my variable cost projections were $600,000, right? And I had a 25% bump with all the overtime and temp workers and management help, guess what? I'm at $750,000 in my variable costs. And remember, my fixed costs are still $250,000. So on that $1 million, guess what? $750,000, $250,000, that's $1 million. So I have now had no profit on this business that I'm working my butt off in. That's not a very good scenario either. Now, a final option I've lived is to lower production output. So don't pay the overtime or pull in a manager. Don't keep running ads. Just operate at a lower capacity, right? That'll keep your unit cost on target. And I saw this in my quick serve restaurants. So coffee shop, for example, we need 10 people in the morning to really pound out those orders for lattes and breakfast burritos and all of that on morning drive time rush, that critical 5:30 in the morning till about 11 a.m., right? But guess what? A lot of times, 4 out of 10 workers might not show up. Guess who's got to try to bust butt as hard as they can? The 60% that showed up. And so they did the best they could, but your capacity is cut because guess what? They can only produce the stuff so fast when they're missing 40% of their team. And so guess what? The lines begin to back up. You see the line on the camera inside the building, backing up out to the street. And then the worst thing for me, it would just give me a pit in my stomach, is you'd see these customers' cars slow down, and often regulars, and they'd look at that line and they'd think, well, that's going to be a while, and I've got to be to work at 7:30, or I've got to be to work at 8:30 or 9 or whatever the number was. And then I'd see them pull off, and I knew exactly where they were going. They were either going to the Starbucks down the street or they were going to the Tim Hortons down the street. So 40% of my business was just driving on by. Now, that's a real bummer, right? But I kept my variable costs still at 60%, right? So let's run the numbers again. I've lost some money here on this because I'm not producing as much. So now I'm only getting $600,000 a year from this business, right? But I'm only still paying the 60% because that's who showed up. So that's going to be $360,000 in variable costs. But my fixed costs, the cost of that building I'm operating out of, the cost of the air conditioning to cool it, the cost of the insurance and the taxes, those all stay the same. Those fixed costs stay the same at $250,000. So add the 360 and the 250. What do you come up with? You come up with $610,000. And I've kept my top line revenue to $600,000. Guess what? In this scenario, by cutting capacity to fight turnover, I've lost $10,000 that year. Now, if I gave myself a $100,000 salary as an owner-operator, now I'm only making 90 with zero, actually negative profit. That's not a very fun scenario. That's not why you go into business. That's not the dream of being your own boss in the entrepreneur life, right? At least not for me. To go in and basically bust my hump in a grinding job only to make less than I could make in corporate or in just a managerial job. That is no fun. That is no fun at all. Let me tell you, folks, reducing turnover is the key to stopping the losses on a failing business or moving from break even to profitability on an average business. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars you can put back into your pocket, into your profits, if you can cut out the turnover cancer. Like I said, I was able to figure this out the hard way. I was able to put in place programs and incentives and ways we hired to lower our turnover in industries that have incredibly high turnover, commercial cleaning, fast food, figuring out how to motivate people to show up to work. And do you know what began to happen? As I figured out this turnover cancer, as I began to cut that out of my business and began to just blow away industry averages, like the industry average would be this, and I could be holding on to people for years when everyone would say, oh, you're going to turn over restroom cleaners every, 4 times a year. And I'd say, I've kept the same people the last 5 years. You know what happened to my business? It became incredibly profitable. And this allowed me to embrace that entrepreneur dream, to allow my family to travel, to live in a dream home, to fully fund my wife and I's retirement, to fully fund our kids' college funds. I just wrote the last check for our youngest kid, his final tuition check. All 3 of those kids through schools with no debt, coming out the other side. Boy, that makes you feel proud as a parent. Not only that, be able to give to our church and other charities that we really value, be able to give generously to those. But more important than all that personal gain, it allowed us as business owners to take care of the very people who were doing the work to take care of our customers. That would be our employees. We were able to pay them higher hourly wages, give them bonuses 3 times a year in industries where nobody gets a bonus at the frontline hourly worker level. And in turn, they loved working for us, and we slayed the turnover beast. If you are tired of turnover, just waka, 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 eating up your profits and sapping your energy, I would love to help you put a plan in place in your business to reduce turnover and to start skyrocketing your profits. All you have to do is book our Rapid Results Consulting. This is the simplest thing ever. Book us for a day or 2 days. We will go in, dig into this with you and your team. We will figure it out. We will put a new plan in place, and we will get you rolling with a proven plan that will reduce your turnover and cut out the cancer that's eating your profits. Now, I am so confident in our turnover reduction strategies that if you don't recoup the investment that you make in us through lower turnover within 6 months, I will gladly refund your consulting fees. I'll write you a check. There you go. Think about it. A day or 2 days, $3,000 or $5,000, and you can put tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars over time back in your pocket. To me, this is a no-brainer. I want to thank you for joining me today on the Super Pumped Business Podcast. And next week, we will dive in to the hidden costs of turnover and how turnover might be stalling your growth and undermining your customer retention. If you want help with turnover in your business, go to superpumped.com to book a free consultation. If you've ever dreamed of pressing pause and rediscovering what makes your heart sing, I invite you to follow along
on our YouTube channel or on Super Pumped Life on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'll be posting every day, not only a podcast, but updates, stories, bonus coverage, and reflections through this Super Pumped adventure. If you enjoyed today's show, I would be so grateful if you told your friends about it, and also if you subscribed or followed us so that you don't miss future episodes. If you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day Super Pumped adventure in the wilderness.
Is your business struggling to retain customers? You feel like you're doing the same things you always do, and yet you just keep leaking customers out the back door. You can't seem to keep them doing business with you, and it's killing your profitability. Well, I'm here to tell you that there may be a hidden reason why you're losing these customers and why it has nothing to do with your systems or how you deliver your product, but it has to do with the people who deliver your product. We are focusing on the Super Pumped Business Podcast on the topic of turnover and the challenge of turnover. And it is a topic that really, since the pandemic, has been one that so many employers I see are struggling with. And it's only gotten worse in the sense that as the laws and kind of the crackdowns on illegal immigration have occurred, workers are more and more scarce. And so workers have more opportunity to test their skills in other places. And there's tremendous demand for workers. And so if they don't like what your business offers, they're going to go somewhere else. And so it really is a competition to not only recruit workers, but also retain those workers. And that's the most important thing. And so last week, in our first episode on turnover, we talked about kind of 3 ways that eats into your profits. The first way is the average worker costs a business about $4,700 to, go through the writing the ad and placing the ad into different job search websites, and then, to promote that, and then the whole process of interviewing and drug testing, background checks, reference checks, all that. Then you've got training, uniforms, all the other kind of, costs. So that can eat up your profit. If you're turning over at once a year or once every 6 months or once a quarter on these employees, that starts to really add up if you are of any size business. So that's the first way it eats up your profits. The second way it eats up your profits is if you decide you're just going to really lean on your existing people when there's turnover and there's open spots, and you're going to feed them overtime, and you maybe going to bring in some temps. All those things you're paying at a much higher rate. So that's also going to eat up your profit. And the third way, and I've seen this too, is companies just say, I just can't find people. So that's okay. I'll just cut production. And so, you may have been projecting on $1 million top line revenue, but instead you're only operating at 60 or 80% of that. Well, that's fine. And it's going to keep your variable costs at that fixed level. But the problem is that your fixed costs continue to remain the same. So if you lose all that top line revenue because you cut back, you're actually going to either be break even or you might even be unprofitable. So those are 3 ways we talked about last week. If you missed the episode, go back, check that out. It's really informative. But today I want to talk about customer retention and how the problem with customer retention may actually be because of your turnover. Now, not a lot of thought or talk is given to this aspect of turnover eating at your business, but it really just permeates, this turnover thing permeates through all levels of your business and all levels of really running a profitable business. So I want to give you 3 concrete examples today from businesses I've worked in, the ways I've seen this tear up a business from the inside out. The first is a coffee shop I owned. With any coffee shop, and most of you have your favorite coffee shop, it really is the people in that coffee shop that kind of make it tick. You enjoy getting to know the barista behind the counter or the person at the checkout, the cashier, and there's a little bit of back and forth in that relationship. And so in my coffee shop, we had a woman named Katie, and she was a woman who loved to come through the drive-through, and she would say through the speaker, "Hi, it's Katie. I want my usual." Now, that was awesome as long as the people on the headset and in the barista spot knew Katie's order, right? Because Katie would just say that and it made her feel good. It's kind of like cheers. Everybody knows your name, right? This is Katie. This is her drink. It was a small coffee with a couple of cream, couple of sugar, nothing complex. But she didn't have to go through the whole order. And the barista knew just how to make it. And then when she'd get to the window, the cashier would say, hey, Katie, it's nice to see you. Thanks for coming by, that kind of thing. Okay. So Katie got used to that and that we were her coffee shop. But then do you know what started to happen? We had some turnover and all of a sudden that barista that had served Katie faithfully for many months wasn't there anymore. And then that cashier wasn't there anymore. And all of a sudden, Katie drives up to the drive-thru and she says, hi, it's Katie. I'll have my usual. And she pulls around. She never even stops because people know her, right? And then it throws this whole clunk in the wheel, right? Because Katie's order isn't in the POS system. So then the next customer drives up and then their order's next, but Katie still isn't in and Katie may be 2 cars back. And so anyway, it clunked up our operations, but it also then when Katie gets to the window, they're like, you're Katie, right? And she's like, yeah, I'm Katie. Who are you? And the person introduces themselves to the cashier and they say, what would you like, Katie? And then Katie goes through her order and they put it in and then they have to make it then. So Katie waits a little bit longer and you can just see Katie's disappointed. And so then what ended up happening was Katie just disappeared for a while. Like a person who came through that drive-thru regularly every morning, you could almost set your watch by it. All of a sudden, poof, was gone. And in fast food retail coffee shop, it's not like you can call Katie up and be like, hey, where'd you go, Katie? Is everything okay, Katie? So Katie just disappeared for, I would say, maybe 6 months. Then finally, Katie came back. And as the owner, I was excited to have Katie back. And so I popped my head out the window. And I said, hey, Katie, it's great to see you. Glad you're back. You know, where you been? Did you go out of town or do you have a health issue? What's going on? Which probably a little much, but hey, you know, I like to get to know my customers. So Katie said, well, you know, I'd been coming here for a long time and everybody knew my order and made it just right. But the last time I came, they didn't know who I was. And then they made the order and it wasn't quite right. And she said, you guys as an independent shop are a little bit more expensive. Not a lot, but maybe 50 cents more than I could get the same cup of coffee at Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons down the street. And she said, so I thought, well, if, you know, it's all the same, I can save 50 cents every day. It's a little bit every week, every month. And so she said, so I just haven't been back. And she said, but today I was in the neighborhood and I thought I'd give it a try. And so it hit me in that moment that turnover that I'd had. Now, it didn't affect me operationally in the sense that the person was still taking the orders just like the previous person did. The barista was still making the drinks just like the previous person did. But because of that turnover, I lost Katie and her revenue for that amount of time. And I saw that time and time again in the retail setting where it just, those personal relationships are what keep the people coming back as customers. And when you have high turnover, you lose that personal relationships. It becomes a commodity exchange. And once it becomes a commodity, the only thing you're competing on is price. And in my businesses, I always try to offer premium products, premium service at a premium price. But once you flatten that playing field to commodity-based pricing is the only thing, I'm not going to win against Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or any of those big national chains with massive purchasing power and just this huge operation, right? So turnover literally cost me customers in that business. Now I want to pivot and tell you another story about a big hotel brand chain, one of the biggest hotel brand chains in the world. And I was working for this particular hotel brand, learning about the hospitality industry. And every month we had a gentleman who would come to Cincinnati from England, and he was working on a startup, and British Airways has a nonstop flight from London. And so he would come in almost like clockwork right about the last week of the month. And he always went to the front desk, and there were a couple of front desk customer service agents that knew him by name and would welcome him. Welcome back. We're glad you're here. He'd say, oh, it's good to be back, and then, the usual banter. How was your flight? And how are your kids? That kind of thing. And so there was a connection there. And then he was pretty programmed, like a lot of travelers are, especially business travelers. He'd go up to his room, check, kind of get himself settled, and then he'd come back down to the restaurant bar there at the hotel. And he learned to form a relationship with a couple of the bartenders. And so he knew them and as well as, a server or two. And so they would always, again, welcome him back. We're glad you're here, that kind of thing. And so it was really kind of a good thing. And almost like clockwork, every month you'd see this gentleman from England check in, stay a couple days. He was a fixture at the bar. It was kind of a good relationship. But then, as in any industry, particularly in food service and hotels, front desk people, they tend to turn over. Same with the kitchen staff, both front of house and back of house. And so over time, a lot of that turnover happened. So he'd roll in to check in and they'd be like, ID, welcome, the standard stuff. But there was no personal connection with the front desk check-in because those new customer service agents at the front desk didn't know him from anybody, right? So checked him in properly, did their job, right? Didn't screw anything up, gave him the same type of Riverview room with a balcony, that kind of thing. Then he'd come down to the restaurant, again, drinking the same drink, ordering the same food that he always ordered. And it was good. It was made the same way, tasted the same. But it was different bartenders because there'd been turnover in that kind of front of house restaurant. And different servers and different busboy. So the entire experience, same hotel, same execution in terms of what the staff delivered, but a different experience for that customer. So that happened a couple of times where the people he had connected with were no longer a part of the organization, right? Nobody at the front desk, nobody in the restaurant. And then again, like Katie, he disappears for 8 or 9 months. You don't see him. And you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. Because you get used to seeing these people, especially the repeat customers. So then he comes back 8 or 9 months later. And so I asked him, I said, hey, did you stop working over here? Oh, no, I've been working here the whole time, every month, right at the, last week of the month. But I decided after the changes in your staff, you're a little bit more expensive than some of the other hotels. I thought, I really love those people, but they're not here anymore. So let me go check out what else is out there. And he said, so I tried this hotel, and they were good too. But I thought, I'll come back here, for this time. But he wasn't particularly bought in. It almost seemed, again, like he'd gone down to the hotel room was a commodity and price was the ultimate decider because we no longer had that differentiator of the people. And again, do you know why? It was because of turnover. As that turnover happened, that connection with the customer was lost. And so all of a sudden he was shopping around. So business lost. Third example I'll give you, I was in the commercial cleaning business for many, many years. And so the way that works is, unlike a traditional business where you have an operation and all your employees come there, do their work. In commercial cleaning, you have employees, but they all work at sites scattered. We were scattered over 7 different counties, 3 different states, pretty big operation, right? And so the cleaners reported to a specific job location. It could be a medical facility. It could be a school, could be a big office tower, suburban office tower, that kind of thing, office building. And so what I found was that the customers tended to bond with their cleaners, their team of cleaners, right? And so they would get used to the familiar faces. See, you could count on in most buildings, you knew who was there early, you knew who stayed late. You'd see them in the hall as you were vacuuming or cleaning the restroom or collecting the trash. How you doing tonight? That kind of thing. And so people got used to who they had. Well, once you started turning over, and they liked the people, genuinely kind of got to know the people. Some of our customers would give our employees Christmas bonuses or, Christmas gifts, that kind of thing. This wasn't even from us. This was from a third party that we had contract with, right? But that's that level of connection they had with their employees. But then we would hit these rough patches where those employees would leave, and all of a sudden, and this happens so often, you put a new crew in there, but they don't stick very long. So you put a new crew in, they bond with the customers for a month or 2 months, but then they quit. They don't want to do it anymore. They're out, and the next crew's in, and then the next crew. Well, do you know what happens when they do that? I guarantee you those customers then decide to shop that service because they no longer have a connection to your company through those human beings, right? So it doesn't really matter if they're contracting with ServiceMaster or Janiking or Coverall, because whoever they contract with is going to bring in a new set of people, and it's those people. So it really, if you don't have a connection with the people, it becomes, again, a price-based commodity where it's just bring in the cheapest one, you have no bond, and you get what you can out of the relationship. I recently saw this at our gym. I go to an athletic club gym in Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati, which is the oldest running downtown athletic club in the country. Great place. But they've gone through a lot of party cleaners from the other side. So I'm seeing this more from the customer side. And so we had a longtime cleaner with a particular cleaning company who did a great job, right? And everybody knew his name, John. I'll say John. John was fantastic, and everybody liked John. John was always smiling. How was your weekend? And sometimes John spent more time talking and bonding with the people who came to the gym like myself than he actually did cleaning, but people liked him. Well, then John left, and they brought in a new cleaner. And I would argue, as someone who owned a cleaning company, the new cleaner was doing a better job on the cleaning part than John ever did. But this new cleaner wasn't particularly personable, okay? So they were just kind of getting down to business, almost get out of my way, gym user, because I've got to mop these stairwells or clean this basketball court or whatever the work was. And then that person wasn't there very long, and then a new person came in. Do you know what all of a sudden the board decided to do? Let's shop the clean. Let's put this out to bid. Let's put out an RFP on the cleaning services. And one of the board members said, because it really doesn't matter. We're going to get somebody new in 2 weeks anyway. So whether it's someone new with the current company or someone new with a new company, makes no difference to us. Let's just go for lowest price. And so here, this company that had served our gym well was probably, because the gym and the leadership and the board could save a little bit, was going to be out on their ear because of that turnover. Now, if John had never left, if that company had been able to retain John and keep him doing what he did so well with the customers, we wouldn't have lost that customer. The bottom line point with turnover is, if you're having turnover in your business, there's a huge economic toll. And I talked ad nauseum about that in the last episode. But it also, I guarantee you, is going to affect your customer retention. There is a bond. People, you think they bond with companies? No, they bond with the people who work for and represent those companies. If they know and love those people, they will be loyal to that company because of that connection with that person. But once you start having a revolving door and those customers cannot bond with people because the people are constantly changing, guess what? The customers are going to walk out that door, and they may or they may not come back. And especially if you are trying to be a premium product with premium pricing, the people are the key. So you have got to figure out your turnover problem. I can tell you, I have done this. You think about turnover problems. I have worked and figured it out in commercial cleaning. I got people to stay loyally in commercial cleaning accounts where they cleaned 17 public restrooms in a public high school, and yet they were staying 5, 6, 7 years. If you can do that, or you can get people to stay in fast food, making salads or making coffees or lattes or running the cash register, if you can get people to do that, I guarantee you I can help your business start turning around your turnover problem. And if you start turning around that turnover problem, you are going to hold on to your customers you have, but you are also going to bolster your bottom line by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars over the course of your business. I invite you, if you are having these challenges, book a consultation with me. Let's talk about this. Let's figure this turnover thing out. I would love to dig in with you and let's figure it out and help you curb your turnover problem, hold on to those great customers you have, and continue to be the business you want to be.
If you've ever dreamed of pressing pause and rediscovering what makes your heart sing, I invite you to follow along on our YouTube channel or on SuperPumped Life on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'll be posting every day, not only a podcast, but updates, stories, bonus coverage, and reflections through this Super Pumped adventure. And if you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day Super Pumped adventure in the wilderness.
What if I told you that a super simple free hack can put tens of thousands of dollars back in your profits and it doesn't cost you a thing? In fact, it takes less than 30 seconds of your time. No subscriptions, no elaborate planning sessions, no investment, just a simple way to increase your ability to recruit and retain frontline hourly workers. Constant turnover needlessly costs employers billions. I'm talking billions with a B, billions of dollars every year, running ads, doing interviews, drug tests, background checks, training, lost productivity, unnecessary payroll taxes, causes you to lose customers, which then hurts your bottom line on the revenue side. And so all this happens when we have high turnover. Now, if you missed the past 2 episodes, go back and just listen to it because it's really staggering. And I'm surprised how many clients contact me and they're like, I can't figure out because we do all this modeling and we deliver a good product and a good service, and yet somehow we're just not making money. And you start digging into the layers and you start to realize they're only putting a small portion away for the amount of turnover they have. That turnover is literally just eating up their profitability. And some of them are on the brink right now because they can't get and keep people. And so in those last 2 episodes, I just talk about the different ways that happens. And I think sometimes talking about it just helps us to wrap our head around really the scope of a very large problem. But today I want to pivot, and I'm excited about this. I want to pivot to solutions. And so over the next 3 episodes, we're going to talk about 3 solutions that I've learned the hard way. Now, just to review, or kind of if maybe this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, I owned commercial cleaning businesses for years. I owned drive-through, both coffee shop, salad shop, ghost kitchen, that type of thing where I'm working with a lot of entry-level hourly workers on the front line of food service. And then most recently through my undercover boss work, I've been in the hospitality industry. So I've seen hotels from the underside, like front desk and restaurant, banquets, housekeeping, all of those things. And so whether it's commercial cleaning or whether it's restaurant business or whether it's the hospitality industry, man, the frontline worker turnover will literally just eat your lunch as a business. And so if I can help you turn that around, I guarantee you, you are going to be very happy. So today I want to talk about one of the things that I've found over time. And again, this isn't magic. It's a lot of things. You try them, you see what works and what doesn't work and so forth. And so, I've learned these things over time. And I often say, I kind of joke about it, but I say, if you can get someone to clean a high school public restroom, in fact, like 17 of them with 10 stalls each in the women's restroom and 6 urinals and 4 toilets in the men's, and you can keep them not months, but years, you've figured out something. And it's the same thing if the person is donning a headset and saying, "Hi, may I take your order today?" If you can get people to stay in those positions for more than a few weeks or more than a few months and start retaining them for year after year after year, think about what that does to your bottom line. So today I want to talk about this kind of turnover piece and one of the solves. The first piece to solving the turnover puzzle is to hire employees within a 10-minute drive of your workplace. Let me say that again. Hire people within a 10-minute radius of your workplace. Now, depending on how automated your employment screens are, you can set that up in the algorithm so it only gives you people within that 10 minutes. Or if you want to go a little bit old school, you can just basically pull out Google Maps or whatever your platform of choice is for your either the manager who's making the hire or the HR person, and literally just punch in their address and it'll tell you it's 10 minutes, it's 11 minutes, it's 28 minutes. So when applicants apply, screen out everybody who lives further than a 10-minute drive. Now, this is not a rule for higher level positions, management and above. But in general, just conceptually, the lower the pay, the shorter the commute needs to be. And we'll get into that exact reason why. But if someone's making $250,000 a year, they might be okay driving for an hour, right? But they're also driving a luxury car, and maybe it's on self-drive or drive assist where they can do some other things, even though, we should all have our eyes on the road. But there's a certain level of comfort with that. But when we're talking $10 an hour, $15 an hour, $18 an hour, $22 an hour, those lower entry-level hourly jobs, the shorter you keep that commute time, the better. It is so critical. And here's why. For the lowest level workers in organizations, transportation, besides their rent, is the number one expense for them. That is the number one thing they face. And if that expense goes up, and every minute you add to their commute adds to that expense, it is more money out of their pocket. So let's just do a quick example. I'm a numbers guy, so let's talk this through. If you're an hourly worker and you're making $15 an hour and you have an hour commute to work, you invest each day to go to work, assuming you work 5 8s, you've invested 10 hours to make $120 because you're getting 8 hours of pay for $15, right? So $120. So instead of making $15 an hour, by adding those 2 hours of your commute, you're now making $12 an hour. That's not sounding as good to the frontline worker, right? But then getting there isn't free. You also have to factor in the gas. So let's just say, for argument's sake, $4 a gallon. Maybe higher, maybe a little lower where you are. But just with the $4 per gallon, let's say you spend 3 gallons each day to get to and from work. You're now down to 108 hours earned for 10 hours of work. So you are now making an effective wage of $10.80 per hour. So sounds great that you're making 15, right? Maybe that sounds really good. But after a few checks, that frontline worker realizes this just isn't worth it. I am really not making a whole lot. Now, if you want to throw in childcare and car registration and insurance, then it's even lower per hour. So that is the case if someone has an hour commute. Now let's go within the 10-minute drive rule, right? A worker is going to commit 8 1/3 hours, so 10 minutes each way makes 1/3 of an hour, to make $120, which means they are making an effective wage of $14.45 per hour. Now, at half a gallon of gas at $4 a gallon, that's only $2. So the worker is still making $14.25 an hour. Now think about that. Which worker is more likely to stay with the company? The hourly worker that's their effective wage is $10.80 an hour, or the hourly worker who's making $14.25 an hour? Which one do you think it's worth it? Which one do you think is more likely to stay? Versus which one is more likely when somebody offers them $15 an hour, but it's 5 minutes from their house? Who do you think they're going to go with? Do you think they love your company so much that they're going to do that? Now, some of you may say, and I've heard this a lot, they knew it was an hour away when they applied, or they knew it was a half hour away when they applied. So clearly they were fine with that. Let me debunk that for you real quick, because if you're applying for an hourly job, you need money. You've got to make your rent, make your car payment, whatever those bills are. You are in scrap and scramble mode, right? So if the only job you can land right here today is a job an hour away and you can start tomorrow or in 2 or 3 days, you're going to take it. But do you know what you're still doing? You're still looking for other jobs, right? Because this is, maybe it's a job, but it's not a great job, at least for your situation. So you're going to end up going through, if you think about the costs of hiring, you're going to go through running the ad and the interviews and the training and the background check and the drug test and all of that stuff and the lost time of productivity, right? You're going to invest all that in that worker. And then 2 weeks later, when a different employer calls them back and they're right around the corner, they're going to bolt. And you're going to be really mad because you're going to be like, well, they knew it was an hour away. Why'd they quit? It's because it didn't work for them. So cut out all that nonsense of, well, they applied, so they must be okay with an hour commute or a 30-minute commute. Stick to the 10-minute rule. Now, here's another thing that you need to think about, because a lot of managers and owners or owner-operators or executives, they don't think about this. Many hourly workers either don't have cars or the car they have is unreliable. So do you know what they do a lot of times? They either walk or they ride public transportation, or maybe they take Uber some of the time. I lived without a car when I was younger in Fort Worth, Texas, and Washington, D.C., all in my 20s, New York City, Boston. Everything is harder when you don't have a car. You got to walk to the subway or the bus stop, and then you stand there and wait for it because you can never time it right. So you're there for anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I can remember the 66 bus in Boston. I would walk to the stop, and then often the bus would roll up and it was so filled, you couldn't even push the massive people onto that bus in order to clear space for yourself. So you'd have to wait for the next one and the next one. And guess what? Pretty soon you were late. Or think about, my daughter rides the Green Line in Boston, and man, that line is down all the time. And so it becomes a nightmare. And so what happens is, the longer your commute, if you think about public transportation, the more transfers and delays and hassles that are going to come into your day. It's opportunities for things to go wrong. And then as an employer, you're thinking, why is Mary always late? And Mary doesn't want to say because the bus is incredibly unreliable, or there was an accident and the bus didn't run the right route today, or whatever that is. So there's a lot built into that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why this 10-minute rule, just in terms of options for that employee. So this summer, I had a situation in our house. We had 2 of our college-age kids home. We had started out with 3 cars among 4 of us working. So it was going to be a little dicey, but we thought we had a plan. But then one of the cars, the clutch went out, and it's a complicated fix on that particular model of car. And so that car was going to be out of commission for basically a month. How can we navigate this thing? And everybody thought they needed to have a vehicle. And so, maybe being a peacemaker that I am, I decided, you know what? I'll just find a way to work. So my work is about 9-minute drive. So it's within that 10-minute driving radius, right? On the bus, it's 35 minutes because I'm in 2 different states. I'm in Ohio and Kentucky. So sometimes getting the bus with 2 different state bus systems or city bus systems is a little tricky. So 35 minutes there, and then an hour to walk. So, those are kind of the matrix for my situation this summer. And so these are all manageable. Now, not ideal, certainly. And a few times I did this, even though it was summer and it was hot, I walked. It was okay, other than I got to work and I was sweaty and a bit smelly, and I think my coworkers didn't appreciate that. And the bus is okay. It's like 35 minutes, but it's a little bit unreliable. Sometimes you can do it in 25 and sometimes it's 45, but again, doable. But it's really a bit of a hassle. But within the 10-minute rule, okay. But my daughter had a commute and it was 30 minutes by car, right? So let's think about her. Is she going to mess around for 90 minutes on public transportation to get where she's going? Because public transportation often takes about 3 times as long. And then walking takes about 6 times as long. So a 90-minute commute, was she going to walk for, what would that be? 6 times, or a 30-minute commute? That would be a 3-hour walk. Is she really going to do that? She going to walk 3 hours to work? Of course not. She's not going to do that. So let's think that through. Many hourly workers have unreliable cars that break down frequently, and they end up stuck on either public transportation or maybe walking. There's also the situation where that car is out of commission just for a time. So a lot of times the car breaks down and there's no money to fix it right now. But if you can get to your next paycheck, then you can take it in and afford the repair, right? So this is the point for many people or many frontline workers when they aren't able to get there. Like I talked about, if your work was 30 minutes away, like my daughter's, it becomes just too cumbersome. So they stop showing up. And it's not because they don't like your company or you haven't done the right thing, that sort of thing, but because they don't see a way to get through until they can fix their car. But within the 10-minute radius, there are lots of options. We've talked about public transportation and walking, but there's also Lyft and Uber. And while that eats into their money, you can do it for a short time. There's also, you can rent, at least around me, you can rent motorized scooters, the Birds, that kind of thing. You can do the red bike, might be a different color in your city, but you can take that, which is an e-bike, and zip down where you need to get. And here's the other one. You can bum a ride. Now, in the hospitality industry, people talk a lot about bumming different things. So they want to bum a smoke, or they want to bum a ride, whatever, bum a Coke, whatever. So when you live within 10 minutes of your job, it's easy to bum a ride with a friend or a coworker because 10 minutes isn't that big of an inconvenience. But if you're the person who lives 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 35 minutes, an hour away, your likelihood of bumming a ride from somebody to or from work is very low. Some business owners will say the reason they can't keep workers is because nobody wants to work, or the workers are lazy, or they're just not motivated. But what I've found is quite the opposite. If workers like their work and their employer, they will go to great lengths to keep their job. So if the car breaks down, they might walk an hour to work and then Uber home, or they might take the bus to work and then get a ride home, bum a ride home from a coworker. And if you keep the job within 10 minutes of where they live, they can scrap and scrape and figure it out and get through to the next paycheck, to get through to when they can get the repair on their car, buy the next month's bus pass, whatever that is. But go beyond that, and you are going to be filling that position over and over again. You are going to be costing your company precious time and precious money. Now, I want to throw a couple other things at you today. The first is, if you have a great worker and you've hired them and they live within that 10-minute radius and they're having car issues, right? Consider the impact of a manager or even an owner, and I've done this as an owner, of what they call scooping them to and from work, right? You know what? That's kind of on my way where you live. I know your car is down for the last 2 shifts this week and the first 5 next week till you get paid. Let me swing by and grab you. You know what that says to that worker? It says, your work matters enough that I'm willing to inconvenience myself as your manager or your owner to come get you. What kind of a message does that send to the worker? It also says, I know that you are fighting paycheck to paycheck, and I don't want you to lose any money on this next check because you can't get to work. So I'm going to help you make that happen. What kind of message does that send to an employee? It sends an employee that you matter, that the work you do matters. 2 of the things we want most, I don't care whether we're a frontline entry-level worker or whether we're the CEO of some mega corporation, we want to know that our work matters and that us showing up matters. We don't just want to be another cog in the wheel. We want to matter. If you will scoop that worker or even just arrange for it. Hey, is anyone going north out of here when we finish tonight? Oh, yeah, I am. I'm headed up to whatever. Hey, could you drive John up there and drop him off? Sure, no problem. All of a sudden, John's still part of that team. And when the next employer comes offering, you're paying him 15 and they're paying him 16, right? They're going to think twice about leaving because they're going to say, that employer cares about me. They drove me to work even when my car was down for a week or 2 weeks. They helped me get to work. What a cool thing. I can recall back when we had our coffee shop, we had a woman, an older woman, in fact, a retiree, who was our barista, and she did a fantastic job. But we had a really heavy snowfall in Dayton, Ohio, and there was no way she was going to shovel out of that mess. It was just it's that heavy kind of snow that all of a sudden they're out there trying to move thousands of pounds of snow in a quick order to get to work. So we knew that Jackie wasn't going to make it to work unless we helped her out. And so my brother and I swung by. We got up really early that day. It was like 3 a.m. or something because we had to shovel ourselves out. But we shoveled ourselves out. Then we drove to Jackie's house and we shoveled Jackie out. And then Jackie was able to drive to work. Do you know what an impact that made on Jackie? And you know what Jackie said every time a customer came through? Customers would say, "We're surprised you're at work, Jackie," because they knew she was a retiree and widowed and she lived alone. And then guess what she would say? "Oh, Ben and his brother Tony came and shoveled me out." You know what kind of goodwill that not only built with Jackie, but also with the customers? Customers would say, "I wish my boss cared enough to shovel me out. I was out there for 2.5 hours this week and I was 15 minutes late and then my boss wrote me up." Really? Which boss do you think you want to work for? Who is going to make a bigger impact? Such a simple action sends the message that you matter and I need you at work. And the work you do is important. What a message to send to your employees. 2 other things I want you to think about with your frontline workers. One is that in a lot of households, those workers are sharing a car, right? So if it's a shared car situation, a lot of times they tag team too if they have kids. I've seen this so many times where maybe one of the partners is on first shift and the other one is on second shift, right? And they either trade off the car when one gets home and the other one comes back, or vice versa, or one keeps the car but just runs the other one to and from work. The longer that commute is, the less likely that whole setup is going to work for that family. They may take that job initially. It's not going to fit longer term with them. The second thing to remember is so many of our frontline hourly workers are scrapping to get by, and so many of them work multiple jobs. Some of those are formal jobs, but a lot of them are more informal sector, I would call it, where they're working for you the normal 8 hours on the W-2 job, but they're also babysitting for their sister in the evening, or they're, doing some auto repair in their garage late at night, or they're whatever that thing is, cleaning houses on the side for cash under the table. If your commute starts eating into that time where all of a sudden the job plus the commute is 9 or 9.5 or 10 hours, they can't do that. And so while they may do your job for a time, they say it's not worth it. And so they move on. That's what drives a lot of our turnover. You've got to put yourself in the mindset of that frontline worker. They are scrapping, and every minute counts. Every dollar they're spending on gas, that counts. That could be the difference between making the rent or being evicted. That could be the difference between making the car payment or having that car repossessed. That could be the difference between being able to afford gas that week or not afford gas that week. Those extra miles and extra minutes make a difference. And the more you begin to understand the whole mindset and the struggles and the challenges that these workers have, the better boss you're going to become. I guarantee you, once you start changing your mindset, you are going to drive your turnover down so low that no matter what you're doing, they're going to want to work for you. You don't think Jackie wants to work for the boss who comes with his own brother and shovels her out in the morning? You think when Starbucks comes knocking and says, we'll give you a little bit more, then she's going to say, oh, sure, yeah, see you, Ben. Here's my resignation. No, because you've impacted her life. I am telling you, this turnover thing is a gold mine you can unlock. There is so much profitability if you can figure this piece out, and I would love to help you. If you want help curbing the turnover in your business and reclaiming all that money that you've been wasting, just flowing out the door, just hit me up for a 30-minute consultation. I would love to dig into your specifics to help you turn around your turnover issues.
Along this journey, I'm not just seeking adventure and renewal. I'm carving out space we so often don't have, to think about and to ponder and to meditate and to pray on life's bigger questions. What is the meaning of life? Where does God exist? Does God exist? How do I fit into the cosmos? What is my purpose? These things that so often we just can't even take the time to put the mental energy into. I have 40 days to dig into that. And along the way, I hope I can muster the courage to be vulnerable, to share some of those struggles that I'll be going through, and also some of the cool discoveries and thoughts and adventures that come my way. I would be so grateful if you told your friends about it, and also if you subscribed or followed us so that you don't miss future episodes. If you're one of our awesome audio-only listeners, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube to see the incredible video footage of all that is going on in this 40-day super pumped adventure in the wilderness. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you tomorrow.